Okay, welcome to the Land Contracts block. Lecture 8, Session 8, I think it is tonight. Now, tonight's festivities. I'm going to get you to do the case study exercise, and where you're going to fill out a contract for the sale of land and a Form 1. This will be the second exercise now tonight. Just before we start, a couple of things I just wanted to just bring to your attention. I was just a few things about the contracts. I've just been trying to pinpoint areas where you might not quite be there yet. The dates of the contracts, okay? Just to go over this again with you, regardless of any instructions you get, what I'm actually looking at is to see that you've been consistent and you've basically given reasonable dates. But the best thing really to do always is when you actually prepare your contract, look at the date of the contract. So, for example, in the exam, you'll probably use that day's date as far as your contract is concerned, okay? So whatever your date of your contract is, if there are special conditions, work from the date of your contract. So if you've dated, for example, your contract on the 1st of October, we'll keep it very simple, the 1st of October, and there's a special condition that you have to get finance, what would be a reasonable period for getting finance? Probably 3 to 4 weeks. Okay, I always think keep it simple. You know, perhaps give a month. That might keep it simple. Okay, and then if there's a proper, for example, if the property, if the contract is then subject to the sale of the property, how long are you going to give, for example, the purchaser time to actually sell their house, for example? That's just to get a contract, just like the one that you're preparing.
90 days.
Well, you could do, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think that's probably a bit too long at the moment.
Sorry, was your question for them to sell their house to buy this one?
That's right. So think of it in 2 stages. So I'm coming to... What's that?
I'll give them a month.
A month.
That's a lot, but I'll give them a month.
A month to sign a contract. So maybe 4 weeks to 6 weeks might be a possibility. Okay? And then essentially to settle...
To settle.
Then to settle on that,
30 days.
Could be another 30 days. So you could be working on it. Depends on the market, but you could be working on, 2 months after the date of your contract before you settle. Could be 2 or even 3 months after the date of your contract. Okay. So always remember, look at your date of your contract. Okay. If it's the 1st of October, if you're going to give finance, maybe work up, say, a month to get the finance. So that would take finance to the 1st of November. You might give them to actually sell their house, 4 to 6 weeks to sell their house, depending on what the situation is, and maybe 2.5 months then to actually settle from the date of your contract. But the reason, the issue that you've got here is that in real life, it's going to quite often depend on how the market is. Okay, so for example, if houses are selling like hotcakes, it's a really hot market, then you're not going to give the purchaser, the vendor isn't going to give the purchaser much time to find a buyer. Yeah. All right. If the market is very slow, then it's quite likely that the vendor's going to be only happy to give the purchaser more time because he wants to get his property sold. Does that kind of make sense? All right. So always think what's realistic. Okay. At the same time, you can't give too long. You've always got to get instructions from your client because you can't give them too long because then your vendor is waiting around and missing out potential opportunities, and the purchaser may basically pull out.
Yeah,
right. Okay. The other thing, so the dates on the contracts are also relevant. Another thing also with contracts. And I've noticed some people, when they fill out contracts, are very quick to write not applicable. Okay, and that may not be applicable, but always just check to make sure that the item is not applicable. So, for example, if the property you're selling is not a strata title or a community title, then you know that it's obvious it's not applicable. Okay, if you've got a question which says things like notices. Notices about the land, and the vendor may not be totally sure. They say, oh, well, I haven't received any notices. You might have things like, a notice from the council, fences notice, that sort of thing. You'd ask your vendor, and the vendor will say, well, no, I don't think so. But there's always the chance that they may not have even opened the envelope. So it's probably better to write non-known in those sort of circumstances rather than not applicable. So you're not being potentially misleading. Did I?
Yeah.
Okay,
No, that's good that you repeated.
okay, good. Yeah, I was just trying to put down a few things. Yeah.
No, you did say it.
Now, next one.
Was it not known or nil known?
Non-known.
Non-known.
Non-known, yeah. So it's really just for you to ask yourself, do we know for sure that there's nothing? Okay, is it obvious that it's nothing? If it's obvious, then it's not applicable.
Yeah.
One other thing also to be careful on, which is something, is sometimes with things like just default rates and interest rates, and some contracts, they'll have a set rate for what interest rate the purchaser or the vendor will pay if they don't settle on time. Usually it's defaulted to a lending rate of a bank in most contracts. Now sometimes they then have a box in the schedule which they'll have, the prescribed rate. And that prescribed rate is usually there to enable the parties to actually increase the interest rate, the default rate, or even make it very simple. For example, they might be saying, right, it's going to be 10%.
So they
both agree on what that default rate will be. Be very careful, for example, of writing not applicable in those boxes, because you might then actually put an argument that there's no default interest rate. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Yes.
So it's probably in those sort of circumstances, if there's a default rate, unless you've got specific instructions, it's best just to leave it blank. So that you shoot yourself in the foot. So that's just a couple of things which came to mind with the contracts. And it's usually dates which can cause a bit of anxiety, but I think whenever you fill the contract out, work from the date of the contract. On the Form 1, remember, it's better to write not applicable. If an item isn't applicable, it's better. You've got three options, but it's better to write not applicable in which column again? My memory's terrible.
The right underneath.
Which column?
Third column.
No, if an item is not applicable on the Form 1 and you're going to write not applicable, which column do you write it in? The first column, which is on the left, isn't it? Okay. Or the alternative is you can actually strike it out, just Z it out. I noticed in the specimen example on the first one, the person who prepared that, they very neatly cross it out. I don't need you to do that in the exam. You can just Z it out, okay, and make it very simple. You won't have time. No, exactly. All right. So you can just Z it out. The other option, I personally prefer either those two options. Okay. The third option, though, which is quite legitimate, is to actually do what?
As in what, strike it out, you mean?
Instead of writing not applicable in column 1 or striking it out, if it's not applicable, the other option in the Form 1 is you can do what?
Oh, leave it off the form altogether.
You can leave it blank. You
Yeah.
can leave it blank, not tick the box.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like that approach.
You might have missed something. People might think you've missed it.
Exactly. In your preparation, you might have missed it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first two are the better approaches. Coming back to what you just mentioned, Julie, the other thing to bear in mind with the Form 1 is that, when you actually fill it out, you're going to often find that there aren't that many disclosures. So it's very common, for the Form 1 to be reduced in size, so you might have only 9 pages, 7 pages, because a whole page in the Form 1 has been not applicable. So it's quite common for that not to be included. All right. So in those cases, it wouldn't be in there. Okay. Apart from those first few which are indicated in the form that have to be in there.
So you're saying when you actually print it off, it's not applicable, you're going to not have those pages in there?
Well, yes, quite.
But you've got to make sure your page numbers, though, isn't it?
That's right. You make sure that you...
3 of 21 or whatever
yes,
it is.
exactly.
21, just to make sure so people don't think, there's a page missing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. So you'd renumber them. So it's most people would never actually serve the full document, which you can see is many pages.
Yeah,
There's a lot of stuff in there. So what you probably might end in, it's quite common, you might only end up with 9 or 10 pages.
Yeah.
Because, 10 pages in the middle, there's nothing. Nothing's relevant. So you just renumber the pages. One other thing is, I noticed in one of the specimen examples, the emergency services levy wasn't disclosed. I think it's a good idea to disclose the emergency services levy. A few years ago, it was common for people not to disclose it. Then you'll remember it went up quite significantly in value, didn't it? Then there was an argument about whether it was a tax or not. And remember, if there are rates and taxes which are less than 12 months old, we don't need to disclose them in the Form 1. Okay, so things like water bills for $60 or $200, for that quarter, less than 12 months that are due. That's right, exactly, because at settlement they'll be adjusted.
Yeah, but the maintenance are leveled once a year as well.
Well, this is the issue. Okay, some people don't actually. The argument was, do we disclose it or not? And the question then is, well, is a levy a tax?
Well, yeah.
Okay. And some people say it is, some people say, strictly speaking, it isn't. I think it's better just to disclose it. All right, put it in. It's usually not, it's simple. And that comes back to the whole purpose of the form, which I want to get your head around, which comes back to, which will actually assists in actually when you think about filling it out. What is the overall purpose of the Form 1? What is it?
To make full disclosure.
To make full disclosure. Okay? So, the purpose is to make full disclosure. So if you can't work out whether to disclose something, you're spending a lot of time trying to work out, oh, bloody hell, do I disclose this? It's safer to actually put it in than not put it out in. All right? But at the end of the day, we should be able to realise when we do the exercises that what's relevant. Okay. All right. Now, so that's all I really wanted to say. Now, really what we're going to be doing now is getting you to actually do the second case study and the Form 1. And distant students, I want you to do this exercise as well, okay? And then have a look at the specimen example, which should be on Learn, okay? Oh, and one other thing I also wanted you to, I just forgot, I wanted just to mention, is in the exam you're going to get searches usually in one bundle, okay? And so what are you going to need to do with those searches?
To transfer to Form 1.
You're going to transfer them to Form 1, but also in many respects you're going to have to identify, remember the searches aren't from one body, are they? It's definitely going to be 2, which is the property interest report and the council searches, and potentially 3. So you want to also get your head around working out, right, the first 10 pages of the property interest report, the next page is the council search, the next page is the strata. All right. So just, you might want to flag them, and even flag them tonight when you're actually doing this, all right, to make sure that it becomes a bit simpler. All right.